House District 52 so far is an open seat, as the incumbent Jeff Helfrich has filed for the Senate position. Our district leans Democratic, and with no incumbent to run against, and we believe that one of our 4 Democratic candidates who've announced so far has a very good chance to flip this seat from Republican to Democrat. I'd like to introduce the candidates who are participating in today's forum. Gentlemen, please stand, or you already are. See, they have to pay attention here, Foghorn. And I'll announce your name so the audience can put a face for the name. David Osborne from Corbett. Bernard Seeger from Cascade Locks. Hank Sanders from Hood River. And Nick Walden Pubalon from Sandy. You can applause, please. Next, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the organizers who put this forum together for their diligent work. Mike Ballinger, who's our vice chair and also did all the sound. Stacy Holman, secretary, doing the video work. Dean Myerson, our treasurer, who will be doing the timing. Debbie Ferrer, who couldn't be here today, and myself. And I'd like to introduce our moderators. Tricia Walker, editor of the Columbia Gorge News, and Dan Spots, recently retired Economic Development Officer for the City of the Dalles. I'll now go over a few of the ground rules for the forum. Oh, so we do that? Okay. Maybe you can.
For the seat assignments?
Yeah.
I think just take a look at your cards, and
Low cards.
low card starts at the front.
Take that left seat.
Right here, Bernard. How about that? Over there.
Oh, over there, okay.
I go forward. Okay, Sure.
I hope you don't want to play with these cards. I was kind of holding mine a little hard. I'll tell you what.
Thanks, Tricia. I'll explain a few of the ground rules for our event today. The organizing committee has screened the questions, and the first 3 questions have been provided to the candidates in advance. The order of the seating for the candidates was determined by a random drawing, which will also determine the order in which the candidates will answer the questions. They will then rotate who answers the subsequent questions first. There will be no opening statements, but there will be an opportunity for closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to a question. We've asked the candidates to please stand while answering their questions so that the audience members can see them better. We're asking the audience members to refrain from applauding or in any other way demonstrating support or non-support for a candidate. Thanks again for attending the forum today, and I'm going to turn the floor over now to our moderators, Tricia Walker and Dan Spots.
Thank you so much. So our first question is, tell us about your educational and employment background and how it helps to make you the strongest candidate to win this race.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So again, Bernard Seeger. I graduated from West Point in '91 and then took on an 8-year career in the U.S. Army as an infantryman. Got to serve in posts all over the world with some really challenging missions and operations. During that time, I honed my leadership skills, my problem-solving efforts, as well as how to best manage resources under challenged conditions. After I did that, I left the Army as a captain and went to the University of Kansas to study public administration with a focus on local government. I spent the next 18 years in that field, and I worked for 3 cities and a county. 6 of those years were working for rural communities with very conservative elected bodies. In 24, I got elected to council here in Cascade Locks, and I've been there for about 18 months. During the last 20 years, I've done everything from build fire stations to underground utility lines, to to reforming code enforcement programs for cities and counties. And I feel like I have a good grasp of both creating legislation and policy, presenting that policy and legislation, debating it, and again for the last year and a half or so, deciding on what policy our city's been adopting. I think that, as well as my work, after I finished my last job, I actually did climate work with a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. And we pursue national legislation, bipartisan, with Republicans and Democrats to get those things passed. So I spent a lot of time talking to the other side. And then lastly, the last few years I've been studying forestry. And I like to think that would help me be a better elected official given how much forest exists in Oregon. Thank you.
Okay, David Osborne again. So happy to be here. So my story a little bit in terms of the question around background in education is that I grew up in Douglas County, a little bit outside of Roseburg on the North Umpqua River. And so have a background in public schools, moved slowly up the valley, went to school at the University of Oregon, eventually getting a PhD at Portland State University with some time at the London School of Economics in between there. And so that educational background I think really roots me in our public schools and the real value that they provide, our public universities here in Oregon, but also gives me the kind of skill sets in terms of understanding the complex public policy issues that anybody in the legislature or any of us as citizens need to be thinking about and dealing with. In terms of my work background, after I finished my education at the University of Oregon, I kind of really dove into trying to address and solve the problems that exist in our world. And really, my entire adult life, I have kind of given all the energy I have to thinking about how do we engage and solve problems. I have founded nonprofit organizations, including the new Sandy River Watershed Council. I've chaired boards, including an organization that helped to steward and protect the Mount Hood National Forest and the drinking water that comes here to the Dalles. I've been involved in community organizations, especially working on climate change around the fossil fuel terminals that existed or were proposed at least for the Pacific Northwest, and successfully helped create grassroots networks to stop a lot of those terminals, which are not what we need right now given what's going on. And so I feel like my background allows me to understand and quickly engage in the complexity that is present for us as policymakers, but also do so in a way that's deeply grounded in listening. As an organizer, as somebody that worked in community organizing, the huge part of that is just connecting with people, understanding what the problems are in communities, and then reflecting those into changes in the relevant government body. I've done that, and I've also done the work of building the kinds of coalitions and changing narratives and stories that we're stuck in so that we can achieve both the small changes that need to happen and the big changes that we need in Salem.
My name's Hank Sanders. I grew up in rural Gaston, Oregon, and that's the first chapter of my life is growing up here in Oregon. My family, because it was started to get too expensive to live out in rural Oregon, moved into Portland, where I went to public school. And then I left Oregon, and I went to college at the University of Chicago, where I studied economics, and I worked as a reporter for the Chicago Tribune after college. And when I was working for the Tribune, I was covering a small suburban town when I uncovered a real conflict of interest that a small suburban mayor was engaging with. And that mayor led to the mayor having tickets placed against me, criminal citations charging me with hampering and tampering with government work in the First Amendment violation that then blew up and was reported on at the New York Times and the Associated Press, and then led to my job in Manhattan working for the New York Times, covering the Trump administration's corruption and other news. But even, when you're growing up in rural Oregon, you have this fond idea of what a big city life is like in Chicago and Seattle. And when I was there, I kept thinking, there's something about Oregon. And I love Oregon, moved back home, packed up my car, drove back home from Manhattan, and got involved in politics. Worked as political director for Congresswoman Maxine Dexter. And now I work in Salem as a legislative assistant, coincidence of coincidences, for my mother, who's a state senator. And if you know about working with parents, it's 98% of the time it's the best thing in the world. 2%, that's still your mom, who's can kind of drive you a little nuts, but it's really a real honor of a lifetime to work for her. And I think my resume shows a couple things. First of all, I know what it's like to grow up and be born and raised in rural Oregon. The cost of gas, whenever that goes up, we pay attention to that. I also have Salem experience and political experience to get the job done. And I've stood up to President Trump's corruption, and I've fought for the little guy as a reporter for the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. And that's why I'll be successful in this job. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Nick Walden Poublon, and I am here because I am running for state representative in District 52. I want to thank you all for coming. I am a rural Oregonian too. Sandy, Oregon, where I live, is the largest city I've ever lived in, and I don't even live in city limits, so I can't vote for mayor, which drives me crazy. And so I get asked a lot about what started me. What is my origin story? Where did this all begin? And it began largely for me my first week of grad school at Portland State University. I thought it was a time when I was going to really get to focus on me and my education and what was coming up for me in the future. And I was diagnosed with a brain tumor that first week. And my life turned upside down. And I realized really quickly that the health insurance that the university was offering was not going to allow me to be a student and a patient at the same time. And so I went to the university administration and said, what do I have to do? And they came up with a long list of things that needed to be done. An advisory board needed to be formed, and someone needed to chair it, and students needed to be found, and forums needed to be held, and things needed to happen. And I figured out how to jump through each one of those hoops. I became the chair of that advisory board. I found 7 students across the university who had medical issues that weren't being addressed. And we held open forums, and we talked to administrators, and we talked to students. And the first time we held one of these kinds of things, several hundred students showed up with medical complaints and things that weren't being covered, things that weren't being addressed. And within 5 months, with my leadership and the students behind me, we fired United Health Insurance from PSU campus, renegotiated with an insurance provider that's actually based in the state, the one that they still currently use. That work prepared me to then become a legislative aide for District 52. So I served as a legislative aide to the last Democrat who held this office. So I know what it's like to dive into the details of hunter's licenses and DMV closures and water rights issues and the things that you are going to want to reach out to your representative and have them give you some time and some help with. And I have experience doing that. Was that time up?
Thank you. So we're alternating down the table. So the next question will be for Mr. Osborne, and then we'll come back to Mr. Seeger at the end of the table. Oregon is facing a transportation funding crisis. Solutions include road usage charges for EV and hybrid vehicles, updating the ODOT governing body, a proposal for a transit funding task force, gas and other new taxes, and more. What specific strategies would you support and why?
All right, thank you for this question. I will do my best in 2 minutes. The legislature has been taking a year, and we have gotten back to ground zero, basically, as for folks that are tracking this issue, referred to the ballot, fighting over whether it's going to come on the May or the fall ballot. But what I will say in the short time that I have is that obviously our transportation infrastructure is critical. And I will be working very hard in this position, if I am lucky enough to be able to serve, to make sure that that happens. I think that we need to listen, though, a little bit to some of the concerns that have arisen around why this has gone back to the ballot. So I'll talk about usage charges here for a second. And certainly I think we need to think about creating equity within usage charges, especially around EVs and hybrid cars, and making sure that people are paying into, at the usage level, the kind of roads and so forth that we use. But this was also one of the major kind of stumbling blocks of this bill, is that the kind of regressive nature of gas and usage-based fees in the context of an affordability and cost of living crisis that is not being adequately addressed by Salem created so much opposition to this bill that it was easily referred to the ballot. And clearly the people that are doing the polling on it see that there's no chance to win that in the ballot. That's why they're moving in the way that they are in Salem. So we have to be thinking about progressive ways to fund things. And you'll hear me talk a lot about this tonight, or this afternoon, because I think that this is a really fundamental and important thing. And so the other piece that I would offer is that one other thing that came up in kind of concern about the current transportation package is maintenance versus capital projects. And I think that this is also something that I would be focused on. How can we make sure that we're maintaining what we already have? I am just getting to know the kind of roads in and around here, but in Corbett, we got a lot of problems with our existing roads. And that's true on the county roads and on the state roads. And so how are we making sure to maintain what we have and being careful with these giant freeway capital projects that were put into the 2017 bill whose costs exploded? Do we need to do some of those projects? Potentially, but first and foremost, I think we need to make sure to maintain what we have and to provide for funding for other things I won't get to talk about.
Yeah, so the thing about Oregon's transportation is that we have never taken it seriously enough. We spend 6.5% of our budget on transportation, which is among the lowest of any country as any state in the country as a percentage of our budget. Washington, California, Colorado, they all spend significantly more, 8, 9, 10%. So we need to carve out more in our budget for transportation. There are other areas where you can find those finances. Department of Human Services, we spend significantly more without the types of returns that we should be getting for our money. That's number one. Number two, I am against a gas tax. It's a regressive tax on low-income rural Oregonians, which I'm just flat out against. I tend to be against an EV tax because we want to incentivize people to buy EVs, but because the prices of EVs have come down, I could be supportive of that. And because it is usually a luxury product, I'd be supportive of that more progressive tax that people are talking about. I think it's time for them to pay their fair share, EV users. I love you all. And also the cars are very heavy and damaging on the roads. So I think really it comes down to we have the money. We have the highest tax burden of anywhere in the country of people who make $125,000 or more. You know, middle and higher income, that's way more than I make, no doubt, but that's still a much lower percentage than, you know, it's more expensive to be a millionaire in California, but it's not more expensive to make $150,000 or something in California. It's more expensive here in Oregon. We have the finances to have good transportation, and it's just about a matter of putting it to use. I mean, we are just not making it a priority, and there are other areas in the budget, like I said, Department of Human Services, 10,000 employees, and again, not the right outcomes that we want to be having with people still living on the street and some of the worst returns on our healthcare system. So we'll be talking about that more, but that's really where it comes down to. No gas tax and making sure that we're really taking care of one another and putting forward real policies that put us together with other states. Thanks.
I think what the whole transportation bill taught us is that we need to be realistic about what we're trying to do with transportation here in Oregon. I think I agree with Hank to some degree that we can't rely on gas tax to get us through solely. It's not going to work. That is an old way of thinking about things. We need to change that. Does that mean that there is some cost to EV and electric vehicle drivers? Yes, but that means that it also needs to make sure that it makes sense, that it's not over abusive, that we're not making a situation where we are driving people away from literally driving electric vehicles. The other thing about transportation that we need to make sure that we focus on is that if we are going to look at taxing people on the number of miles that they use the road, that there needs to be a cap for rural folks. Because there is no choice. There are so many rural people that are in a position where there is no choice for them to see a doctor in Portland. And there is no choice for them to take mass transit in order to be able to do that. And we need to make sure that we're thinking about those people and that we're thinking about rural Oregonians first. So the other thing I would also think about is an ODOT overview of where they're spending their money. I think we need to look and see about where these monies are being spent, how they're being spent, before we start talking about cutting other agencies in order to fund them. I think that transportation has been on the back burner for quite a while. I mean, driving up and down the street that I live on, sometimes I wonder if it's the Oregon Trail or if I'm driving through my district or through my front yard. It's pretty rocky out there, and it shouldn't be that way. So I think we need to be realistic about what it is that we're looking at. We need to make sure that we're not basing this solely off of gas taxes, because that's not going to get us through. And we need to make sure that we are prioritizing rural voters and rural people who have to use roads, and who don't have a choice whether or not they're going to do that.
So I have 3 parts of a governing philosophy, and part 1 is that when you govern, you should govern responsive and responsibly. It's my opinion that when you underfund transportation, you are being irresponsible as a governing body. We shouldn't do that. I often say one pothole can cause thousands of dollars of damage to random drivers in the driving public. How is that responsible by not taking care of your infrastructure? You need to do that because we all benefit. Now, given the challenge we've seen with this conversation on the funding, we got pushback on the bill that was passed by the legislature. Having said that, if I were given this opportunity, I would prioritize the funding. The first would be support of the EV and hybrid usage charge. I've been driving an EV for 12 years. I think it's very unfair that I haven't paid anything in the road system during that entire time. That needs to change. And the reality is those more efficient vehicles, again, they're just not using, there's not a nexus between the gas tax and the use of the road. So we need to fix that. And then the freight and the heavy vehicle charge, again, I also endorse that. The state of Rhode Island, they did a huge revamp of their infrastructure funding several years ago, and it was proven to be an exceptional success. One of the things they did was change the way they charge heavy vehicles. And the last thing is the gas tax. So right now we're at 40 cents a gallon here in Oregon, but meanwhile you got states like Utah that's at 35 cents and Colorado that's at 22. I think it's a fair question we should be asking. How are they keeping their roads in the shape they are? Maybe they're worse, but if they're not, how are they doing that and not taking the gas tax that we are? Let's explore that and see if we can't do things more efficient.
All right, we're going to start with Mr. Sanders this time. The question is, school districts are facing a significant reduction in funding due to federal cuts. How do you propose to address this shortfall?
Yeah, we got to do a couple things. First of all, we have to decouple our tax system from the federal government. I don't love it. Nobody loves it. We never imagined that we'd be in this position, but it will save us about $400 million a year, according to the expert analysis. So that's number one. We have to do that. And guys, we got very close to doing it last session. It just stumbled in the Senate. So we need to make that happen. And I think there's a lot of momentum to make that happen. Number two, we have to make sure that when lawmakers make decisions, there are consequences. So we cannot fill up every single gap. So we need to make sure that we're spending our dollars at the best possible area. And when it comes to education, that area is on the early childhood years. So we need to make sure that we're investing our money as much as we can in those years, because that's where all the education experts say is the most important thing. Number three, I have talked to the union leaders, I have talked to education experts, and what they say is when there's something that's got to give, it is unfortunately classroom sizes. Now, we're not talking about going to 50 or 55, but if it means making sure that schools stay open, unfortunately, because actions have consequences and lawmakers in the federal government have decided to cut our education funding to pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest people, we need to give a little bit of an inch here and there on classroom sizes and also be making sure that we're investing in those early years. That's what the experts, believe it or not, and the union leaders say is where we need to give a little bit. So I'm in line with them on that. And I know that classroom sizes are a hot button issue, but that's where that needs to come from. Again, I just think it's really important to remember that, that if we decouple from the federal government's budget, we can save our state about $400 million, so I'm fully supportive of that. And we make sure that our money is going to those early childhood years, and time is up, but we need to be making sure that we're taking care of everybody in those early years.
So here's where I come at this from. I'm a substitute teacher, so I teach kindergarten to high school every day. And when we talk about class sizes, I get itchy, because I'm the one who's actually in there looking at what the difference is between 35 and 40 students and what it looks like when there's 28 students versus 30 students. We have a serious problem with education, the way that it's funded in this state. I was here the night on the Dalles when you all lost the bond measure to expand the high school and stuff here. It was devastating. It was one of the first nights that I spent with you all when I was really thinking about being a candidate 2.5 years ago. And what I heard from a lot of people is that we needed to that we need to separate our property taxes from the way that we fund education. That what we're doing is we're creating a lot of haves and have-nots. And so that's something I'm interested in looking at. But we can't do that without being honest about where the funds are going to go and how they're going to be used. You can't decouple one thing and not have any funding then as a resource. I think we need to pay attention to, it's very easy to say things like, let's increase class sizes, or let's give a little bit more towards teachers, or let's put a little bit more on the back of parents or students, without realizing that those costs, especially in early development with children. I mean, I teach kindergarten, and sometimes the kids, when at the beginning of the year, they show up and they're ready, and some of them aren't ready. And there's a big difference between the haves and the have-nots, and where they are and where they should be. I think we need to get serious about education. We need to get serious about how we fund it. I think we need to get serious about what's happening in the classroom. After I ran in 2024 and narrowly lost the Republican minority leader, I wanted to know what was happening in the classroom. So I started becoming a substitute teacher so that I could actually feel what was actually taking place. And what happens, unfortunately, in our classrooms is that we're pitting students, the haves and the have-nots, against each other. The students who need more attention are being pitted against the students who don't need more attention, and somebody's going to lose in that calculation every single time. We have bright students. We have a great future. We need to nurture it like we do.
So back to governing philosophy, just like transportation, underfunding education is, in my mind, is irresponsible. We've got to properly fund our education if we want a healthy, productive society. So we have a general fund challenge. That's where those funds come from. How do you address that? I love the idea on decoupling. The one maybe caveat I would do to that, I would like to explore is if we took the benefits, the tax benefits of HR 1, which are causing this problem, but somehow isolated our lower income residents. If they could somehow benefit from that and not necessarily from the higher income, that might make sense given all the affordability and challenges we're seeing. Next, when it comes to revenue, I really think we need to be revisiting kicker reform. You can do this and not have it be that impactful. As someone who's loved personal finance all his life, I have a philosophy of pay yourself first, okay? And if we did kick reform right, we would be doing it. We'd be setting that side for, and if you do that, people don't notice it gone. You don't notice it's gone, but meanwhile, we've created incredible opportunities for new revenue. I did some study on this. A year or two ago, this reform that was recently proposed would have brought in another $500 million in revenue, and a couple years before that, it would have gone $2 billion in revenue. So the potential is dramatic, and I think it's something we should be considering. And the last thing, or two more things, I really do think we need to explore a sales tax. Again, this speaks to general fund. Hawaii has a sales tax, and as you can imagine, it's a big tourism community. We have a lot of tourism, but they don't pay their share. They use our services, and they're an incredible potential source for new revenue. I think that's and you can do it and keep low-income folks whole. And last thing, I'd like to see some spending reform, potentially on OPSERV and PERS reform. Thank you.
Okay, so this education issue is really near and dear to my heart. I have two kids that are in elementary school in Corbett. I serve as vice chair of the Corbett School Board, and I'm a parent. I'm volunteering every week. I'm in the classroom, seeing what's going on. And our schools are on the brink. The idea that we can cut funding to our schools and have the kind of outcomes that we want, or continue to have people want to stay in the profession, is ludicrous. I've seen that here in what happened with the proposed cuts in the North Wasco district. Hood River is already talking about cuts. Corbett's already talking about cuts. And this is before the thing that we need to focus on for those of us at this table here, which is the $5.7 billion projected deficit in the 2027 biennium. So we've already talked about funding for transportation. Now we're talking about education. Certainly decoupling, I support that. That's an important piece. Reforming the kicker on the highest income Oregonians, that's an important piece, but it's nowhere near enough. It's nowhere near enough. And so I think that any candidate in this race has to have an answer to that question. How are we going to generate that money? Otherwise, the cuts are going to be severe to everything. Now, for me, the answer is most, I think, clear, and I don't think it's the sales tax. I think it's undoing the worst part of Trump's tax cuts to the very wealthiest, to the millionaires and billionaires. The state of Oregon can collect the revenue that the federal government is no longer willing to collect and no longer willing to pass on to the states. And then people's effective tax rates at the very top end of the income ladder, 250 plus, $1 million, the billionaires that we have in our state, will then be at the same or lower than the effective tax rate they paid in 2015. 2015 wasn't a real economic hard time compared to now. I think they'd be okay. And what that allows us to do is generate the billions of funding we need to backfill those big cuts coming in 2027, so we don't have to cut people off of healthcare, but so that we can also support our schools. Our schools need more funding. We cannot raise class sizes. I've been in too many classes to where that is not an option. The teachers, the educational assistants don't support it, and this kind of reform I'm talking about allows us to support our schools with the more funding that they need.
Thank you. And the next question is for Mr. Poublon, and then we'll go back down to the table. So, school districts are facing sorry about that. What legislation would you propose to address the issue of affordable housing?
Well, I think housing is one of the hugest issues that comes up when I talk to constituents on the phone and in person. It's a wraparound thing. It involves your health. It involves your ability to get education. It involves everything. Housing is everything. And I've talked to too many people who are living outside of this district and living in the Dalles and commuting to Hood River, living in Gresham, commuting to Hood River because they can't afford to live within this district. It's a serious problem. So what would I do? I would put out legislation that encourages backfill, so that we are not constantly putting ourselves to a question as to whether or not we interrupt urban growth boundaries. When we do decide to punch through urban growth boundaries, when we do it, we need to be responsible about the kinds of houses that we build. And I'm talking about low and medium income housing that is available to people of my generation so that they can move into them and have starter homes. It does not help anyone when we do this, when we make room for building and we set aside land for building, and then we build mansions that aren't even affordable to people of my generation. That is not going to help us. That is not what's going to get us out of this situation. So I would suggest legislation that does that. I would also suggest legislation that gets rid of some of the red tape, that makes it easier to build in areas where we have been less helpful. I also think that Ben Bowman, my majority leader, has just suggested a new bill that he wants to put forward that would stop hedge funds from coming in and purchasing homes within the first 3 months that they're on the market, so that people who are living in our district have a chance to buy homes and buy property before it actually reverts to being sold to hedge funds. So that's another piece of legislation that he's just talked about that I would absolutely support.
Yeah, this is a really tough one. You know, I've been talking to lots of local elected officials, and lately what I'm hearing is the governor is just shoving all these, housing supply laws and proposals down our throat, and we want to protect single-family homes in neighborhoods. We don't want the density. We want to push back on developers. And so I hear that side of the equation. And then again, as a student at OSU, I'm talking to classmates and like, Bernard, I'm never going to be able to afford a home. How can I can never afford a home with a yard, And I always push back to like, look, you can afford a condo. That was my first home when I bought a home in Seattle. And then you build equity and then maybe you can get that home. I mean, that's my middle ground to him. Of course, he didn't like that answer, but that's the pickle we're in. And, as far as laws that we should be considering, and when you look at the two sides of this conversation, I'm just going to be very frank with you. I want more housing. I think it's so critical for all the things that you've been hearing. It's critical to economic development. It's critical to quality of life. It's critical to the environment. Because, again, folks are polluting and commuting to meet their job obligations. Everyone should be able to live close to the place they work, and we just don't have that right now. So how do you solve that? Again, the governor has a lot of things. I want to continue her work, but also do things like, Los Angeles had a Costco built, and then they had 4 stories of units above that, housing units above that. Why don't we do more housing on big box stores? We know big box stores aren't going away. The land's gone. Now let's build up and create housing. I like co-housing, co-development reforms as well. So there's things we can do that are innovative, but in the final analysis, I'm going to be pushing for legislation that increases housing supply.
So this is a critical issue. You know, we have to have affordable housing at scale so that people can stay in the communities they love. When I'm spending time, which I spend a ton of time now here in the Dalles and in Hood River and throughout the district, this is what comes up over and over and over again. It comes up in Corbett all the time. It's a major point of contention in Corbett around people not feeling like their children can continue to live in the community that they love. And for some of those folks have been there for a long time. So we have to have a solution to this problem. A few things that I would agree with that have been shared is that we need to make sure that we are regulating at the right level, that we have the right minimum standards to safeguard labor, sustainable design, environmental issues, and so forth, but that we're making it as easy as possible to build housing while keeping those minimum standards. And I think there's some good work to be done there. I think that we also need to keep the bad financial actors out of the system, the private equity companies that are coming in and exploiting the opportunity to make money by buying these single family houses and then selling it later on in the future. We have to take that kind of action out of the housing market as well as all the other markets. But we also have to have resources. And you're going to hear me coming back to this again and again, because I think that there's no way that we solve the critical problems we have, education in the last question, housing in this one, without a substantive amount of resources. There's no little regulation tweaks that we can make to get the affordable housing we need at the scale that we need it. And so again, I'll go back to what I talked to before, which is that this need for this kind of progressive revenue reform that undoes Trump's tax cuts to the very, very wealthiest and allows us to have the billions of dollars, because that's what we need, billions of dollars to backfill what's coming up in the 27th session, and then to be able to pursue policy like social housing, which is a massive injection of money into building affordable housing, such as is happening here in the Dalles and in Hood River, but also is done so in a way that local control is maintained, so that we can give local municipalities the resources that you need to build the types of housing that you want for your communities, using innovative construction design to bring down costs, taking those bad actors out of the system, and giving you the resources that you need to have the affordable housing for your communities.
So I'm pretty sure I'm the only candidate who doesn't own a home, who doesn't own my home. I am also the only candidate from a generation where we are not expected to have nearly as high home ownership percentages as my parents and grandparents, and the prices of homes have escalated incredibly, and the supply has not increased over the course of my lifetime at the same rate as other folks' lifetimes. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are converting empty lots. We have over 500,000 empty lots in near urban centers alone, and that includes centers like the Dalles and Hood River and things like that, that are just not getting developed. And why aren't they getting developed? Well, if you talk to developers, they will tell you that a luxury apartment building at 32% capacity makes more money right now than affordable housing at 95% capacity. So why would they ever develop that lot into affordable housing with including tax breaks and all the benefits that we give affordable housing? It's not enough. So we have to lead with carrot and stick. We have to continue to ratchet up those benefits for developers that are building affordable housing, and we also have to add fees for vacant lots. Those fees are not penciling out when it comes to developers deciding about whether to keep that lot empty, waiting for some luxury building to get built versus building affordable housing. So yes, it would be wonderful if we can, tax more, have more resources, but at the same time, we can also pass laws that will be fiscally responsible, and decoupling ourself from the federal government is not going to fix everything. We have to get smarter about the policies that we're putting forward, and that begins and ends with making sure that there are less than 500,000 vacant lots that can fit affordable housing here in our districts.
All right, and we're back to Mr. Seeger. With issues of water and power supply, as well as local impact and land use, and proposals by data centers to use in-house nuclear reactors, what are your positions on the widespread growth of data centers in Oregon and the region? Should restrictions be placed on their expansion?
Yeah, this is another good one. So generally, I would like Oregon to be pursuing policies that clean up our energy grid. Right now, 38% of our energy comes from natural gas, and the rest comes from renewables. So we've done pretty well, but we've got a ways to go. And the reality is, if you've been following the Oregonian, they've done a wonderful series on the challenge of our energy needs as we move into the future. Data centers are a big player in why our rates are going up, especially for customers like PGE and Pacificor. So the legislature just passed a really smart act called the Power Act to make sure if their demand is funded by their expansion, and I'm supporting that completely. Now, meanwhile, you've got a proposal here in the Dalles where Google wants to expand, but they need more water to do that. You know, one of the things I learned in local government is the power of the franchise fee. And I don't know if you guys know it, but the Dalles has one of the lowest franchise fees in the states, at 3%. And it's pulling in about $5 million a year in revenue for the city. And in my mind, if you could raise that a little, say 3.5, you could generate all kinds of revenue to take care of some problems, a lot of the problems we've talked about, housing, maybe a homeless shelter. There's a lot of things you could do with that money. And Google would be footing that bill because they're the major power consumer in the city of the Dalles. So, you know, there are counties that have data centers, and they have squeezed those tech companies to do good things for the community. So I feel like if we play our energy grid smart, it doesn't have to be a net negative. And as you'll also know, when those properties come off the tax rolls, they do extremely benefit the constituents in the cities that they're working in.
Okay, so this is another important issue. I drove past the large data centers on my way in here. I know that this is a significant thing here in the Dalles. And one thing that I'll start with is to say that the so-called small modular nuclear reactors, I oppose those completely. There is no safe long-term way to store nuclear waste. It is absolutely unacceptable, and I would absolutely work to continue to solidify what is Oregon's already existing ban on nuclear power. This is not the solution to the climate crisis, to energy, to anything. There's no way to safely store that material. In terms of the data centers, I think there's 3 issues that have to be solved for. One is water. If we're going to have these facilities, we need to make sure that they're not depleting our water supplies in ways that it seems like they are. The second is energy. If these facilities are going to exist, the ratepayers, us, cannot hold the burden of the profit that is being made in these data centers. That is also not being solved for currently. And the third issue is around pollution. We have to know that the way in which these facilities are operating, and you saw in Eastern Oregon recently that the way that the water table is changing is creating nitrate pollution in wells. Here there's a kind of question around PFAS, which is a particular type of long duration chemical that is used within these facilities, and how is that getting out into the atmosphere. This is not a proprietary secret, as some of the corporations would tell you. This is something we need to know about, whether or not they can safely operate. So those are the 3 issues that we have to solve for if we're going to be able to allow these facilities. The other thing, though, is to make sure that the communities are benefiting from them in a way that is proportional to the profit that's being generated in them. So much money is being made right now by artificial intelligence, by these tech companies. And so if we are going to be building these facilities, a potential risk to our communities, we need to make sure that folks in our communities here in the Dalles and elsewhere are getting the money for the schools, for housing, for all the things we just talked about. But right now, I don't think that these projects are meeting those tests around water, pollution, or energy use. And so I think we need to pause the construction of these facilities until we figure that out.
I'll tell you a quick story. It was 8:30 p.m. last Thursday when I called Mayor Richard Mays, Mayor of the Dalles here, and we chatted until about 10 p.m. And I told him, and he and I are friendly, and we've gotten coffee over at the Riv many times, and I told him that I disagreed with him when the latest OPB article came out about how water is being pulled from Mount Hood, and I said, I know you're telling me that this plan has been in the works for 15 years, but I just can't believe that Google doesn't have a role in this. So number one is just we have to have honest conversations about how much water and energy Google is using, because they're not always being honest with us, and they have forced Oregon Live and Oregonian to sue them for information. We need to just be upfront, because if they're using it, they gotta pay for it, and the way they don't pay for it is if we're having, beating around the bush here a little bit. Number two, we have immense tax breaks for data centers that are going to be developed in the Gorge and throughout the state of Oregon. That needs to stop. We need to stop giving out tax breaks at that clip to our data centers. It's just that, we have enough data centers. We filled out that part of our industry, and I think we're good on data centers. And we also need to make sure that data centers aren't just paying for the energy that they use, they're also paying a premium because they're jacking up all of our rates and getting away with it scot-free. So I think there should also be a premium tax fee on the energy that they use because they're driving up all of our utility bills and they're not paying for those increases. And right now we're in the middle of an affordability crisis that one way you and I are getting our clocks cleaned over at the when we're paying our bills is at the utilities when all of our rates are going up because of these data centers. So we need to make sure that they're paying for the data that they use and how much they're driving up our rates. We need to make sure that there's no more tax breaks for data centers that are going to try to come into our state. And we need to make sure we're having honest conversations, not only with our lawmakers, but also our businesses on what they're using in our state.
So I think a lot of good things have already been said. I agree with David about nuclear energy. It should have no place here, and making sure that we limit that and that we stick by abiding rules. The thing is that data centers are here to stay. We can't get rid of them or wish them away. We need to make sure that they're dealing with us transparently. And that when someone stands to make gain or make money out of the situation, that it happens here first, rurally, and in the Dalles. And that we're the first ones to benefit from anything that comes out of that situation. Now, can we stop them from coming up in the future? Yes, we can, by making sure that we don't give away tax incentives and tax breaks that are largely too progressive and make it too easy for them to move in. Can we and should we? Yes, we should. But what we need to do is make sure that rural folks and people on wells and people who are on private water are not being left out of the equation and being the last people at the table to have part of the conversation. So the conversation needs to be transparent, it needs to be open. We need to know exactly what they require, these data centers require in order to operate, and what they're going to require in the future. So we have to ask questions about the future. We will run into trouble every time we assume that they're watching out for our best interests because they simply are not doing that. They are watching out for their bottom line, and we must be aware of that.
Going to the next question, and this will be back to Mr. Osborne. Even though Republican incumbent Jeff Helfrich is not running for House District 52, how would you distinguish yourself from his positions and policy goals?
Well, where does one start? I think that where I will start is something that is a focus for me, which is something you've heard me talk a little bit about, but I'll take this opportunity to talk more about it, which is that I don't think the policies of Representative Helfrich actually support the ability of working people, of everyday people, to have the foundations of life that they need. That's in terms of housing and providing affordable housing solutions, such as which we've talked about. That is in terms of education. I recently emailed Representative Helfrich and Senator Drazen about the urgent need to tap into the Education and Stability Fund so that schools aren't cut by the state this school year. And you can imagine the response that I got. And that also includes childcare and preschool, funding that kind of early childhood development, making sure the preschool is funded at scale across the entire state. That is such a critical, high-value intervention that can be done. And then making sure that we're engaging in the kind of environmental stewardship that we need to address climate change, to make sure that we're doing wildfire resilience and mitigation, home hardening, these kinds of things. I don't think that we've seen the kind of leadership from Representative Helfrich on these issues in any meaningful way, and we certainly haven't seen him talking about how do we provide the resources that are needed to be able to meaningfully make a difference in these issues: housing, healthcare, education, childcare, the environment. He has not pursued policies or an agenda that has allowed these issues to move forward meaningfully. If we think about the duration of his tenure, all of those issues pretty much are worse. And so at the heart of my campaign is looking with, fully at the $5.7 billion deficit that's coming at us in the 2027 session, having an openness to finding the efficiencies that exist within our existing state budget, but also having the willingness to get the revenue by undoing the worst of Trump's tax policies and his tax cuts for the very, very wealthiest, so that we can actually materially make a difference in working people's lives in the way that Representative Helfrich is not.
To start, he's not around. I mean, I have met with most of the people here in this room and many people who couldn't make it today who are leaders in our community. And sometimes I'll ask them, like I'll ask, Bill Lennox or Phil Brady, I'll say, when was the last time you saw or met with, Jeff Helfrich? And, it's crickets. So in order for us to actually pass policy that lowers our costs because our costs are really high, you have to actually be talking to regular people, you gotta be talking to leaders, you gotta be talking to community members about what we can do to lower our costs. And that's how I came up with my platform, which is 3 things. First of all, making sure we're passing comprehensive policies to harden our homes to prepare them for fires that'll lower our increases on home insurance rates. Number 2, passing tax credits for rural child care workers. And number 3, creating the Agency of Medicaid Paperwork Support so that our hospitals can stay open by keeping Medicaid dollars in our state, because H.R. 1, Trump's big bill, is going to be cutting 200,000 Oregonians off of Medicaid unless we can help people stay on Medicaid through their paperwork. So all of my policies I did not come up with alone in a dark room. I came up with them by meeting with our leaders, meeting with you all, seeing you at pop events, talking to you at the RIV and the ENZA, and talking to you about what we can do to lower our costs. And that's how we get the Agency of Medicaid Paperwork Support, child care tax credits for rural child care workers that'll lower all of our costs because it's too dang expensive to raise a family here in the Gorge, and I'd like to have a family one day. And then also making sure that we're investing in our home hardening system so we can lower those insurance rates that go up 30-40% every single year because of wildfire risks. We have not taken a comprehensive look at any of those things, and Helfrich ought to be meeting with people to talk about it because those are some pretty darn good ideas we all came up with.
So I think the question is about how do I differ from Helfrich, and Mr. Helfrich, Representative Helfrich and I know each other well. We ran against each other in 2024. I came within 1,300 votes of catching him. He was the minority leader at the time with a lot more money on his hands than I had and a lot more dollars to spend. How do we differ? It was never clearer to me than the day that we appeared for our Willamette Weekly interview and sat across from each other, and each of us had a chance to ask each other a question. And one of the questions that I asked him, and this was 2024, so it was a little more pressing because Roe v. Wade was really kind of just had been struck down and things were getting kind of questionable about that. And I asked him about healthcare because that's the heart of where I exist. And I said, do you believe in a woman's right to choose? And he said, I have daughters. And I said, to be fair, that's not an answer to the question. Do you believe that women have a right to choose? And he said, I believe in my daughter's right to health care. And that was as much as he would say. So I finally asked him a third time, did he believe in women's right to choose? And he said no. So that's one big area where we differentiate. That is a stopgap for me. That is a position that I will not move on. That is one big difference between he and I. I think the other thing that I jokingly tell people that I would change if I take over this office, when I take over this office, is that he also puts out a birthday card to everyone every year that they get in the mail. I think I would end that because I would have my staff doing more important things. And so that's one area where we would be different as well. I think Hank is not wrong in that he is not in the district and not very visible. The few times that we did have forums in the last 2024 race, he did not show up to. And so oftentimes forums were canceled because we couldn't have them with just one side represented. And I looked forward to the chance to have to talk with him and be able to speak about my issues versus his issues. So we are night and day, Mr. Helfrich and I. And one of my proudest examples of that is that when we were running against each other in 2024, he published a thing that said I was a radical liberal, and I have it on my wall at home.
So, I know Jeff as well. When I was city administrator in Cascade Locks, he was on council. So he was my boss for a couple of years and got to know him pretty well. And we were friends back then. Of course, he was my boss, so I had to kind of be a good friend if I wanted to keep my job. But I think he respected the work I did. Having said that, he is way to the right from my perspective. I don't know if you saw, but he did a big post when some of the protests were going on in downtown Portland, basically supporting the efforts of ICE. And to me, that's just outrageous given the way they've been behaving. So he and I completely disagree with the role ICE has been playing not only in our community, but across the country. I will also tell you, he's too much of a gun rights supporter. I spent 8 years in the Army. I know what responsible gun use and gun ownership looks like, and what is allowed for common citizens, in my mind, is way too generous. And he opposes all efforts to decrease gun violence, and I take issue with that. I think he's shown himself to be very much against the clean energy efforts and renewable energy efforts the state's been trying to push. Again, he's not taking climate change seriously, and he knows that. We've talked about that, and I take issue with that. Lastly, I didn't know where he stood on choice, but needless to say, that's a deal breaker. And finally, let's see. That's it.
For these next 4 questions, one will randomly be chosen for each candidate. All 4 questions address top priorities for current Democratic legislators for the 2026 short session, which begins tomorrow. Each candidate will get a different priority topic on which to elaborate, and we hope the audience will learn about several important categories of legislation that will be debated and decided over the next 5 weeks. And then for our audience, any time at the end will be used for a meet and greet, so please stick around. And we're going to start with Mr. Sanders. One of the priorities for Democrats in this upcoming legislative session will involve responding to what many see as out-of-control federal immigration agencies. Several bills are likely to be introduced in the next few days. Can you speak to the ideas being proposed and what you think of them?
Yeah, first of all, I am endorsed by several of the leading folks who have been on the forefront of fighting against ICE in the Dalles and Hood River and in East County. That includes Gladys Rivera, City Council President in Hood River, Letty Moretti, County Commissioner, and then Omar Perez, leader of Latinos Unidos here in the Dalles. And when it comes to the policies that are getting put forward, there's a couple things. First of all, there's a ban on law enforcement wearing masks. That needs to go through 2 things. First of all, for non-federal agents, that can be passed through the House and Senate. I'm supportive of that, but that's not the issue that we're seeing. The issue we're seeing is with federal, Border Patrol and ICE agents, and that has to go to the ballot. And so voters have to decide on that, and I'm fully supportive of that. Number 2, a general fund to have some support, financial support, for the families of the detained to be able to pay for either legal bills or to pay for that smash window or to pay for groceries. It's not going to be everything. It really can't, unfortunately, it can't be everything. We'd like it for it to be everything, but just a little bit of help to make sure that ICE agents are not doing what they're doing now, which is detaining people who fit a description and then figuring out the charges later and then knowing that people will agree to things because it'll get them back to work or they need to feed their family, whatever it might be. And then also just making sure that if the federal government, the third thing is making sure that the federal government is going to use our tax dollars for ICE, not something that our voters want, then we can withhold funds from the federal government. They're using our money for ICE, which again is not something we support, or at least I don't support, and I imagine a lot of us here at this town hall don't support, but having it go to our lawmakers to say, hey, if they're using your dollars for something you don't want, then we can withhold those dollars, and that's within our constitutional rights as a state. So those are the 3 things that are being proposed. I'm super supportive of all of those things.
The next question is from Mr. Publon. Another priority for Democrats in the upcoming legislative session is likely going to involve strategies to offset the anticipated $900 million revenue shortfall as a result of President Trump's and the Republicans' H.R. 1, aka the One Big Beautiful Bill. Can you speak to the strategies being proposed and what do you think of them?
Yeah, the big, beautiful whatever. It has put a huge hole in our state deficit, or in our state budget. And it's one that I'm really concerned about. It's one that I've been talking to legislators about. I am endorsed by 7 or 8 state legislators who have all see that I am going to be the best candidate to face this head on. It's going to take some austerity. It's going to take some climb back of the big, beautiful bill and the tax benefits that were given as part of that. I support that. That is what's being discussed at the moment. We cannot afford to make up $900 billion or $900 million is not something that you can make up just by scratching here or there, cutting from one department or another and moving things around. Unfortunately, it's something we're going to have to face head on. And so I do support legislation that does do that, that uncouples our federal tax from the state tax, so that we aren't going down this hill with Trump and his administration and whatever it is that they decide to do next.
Our next question is for Mr. Seeger. The Trump administration has made every effort to scale back environmental protections and funding for renewable energy. How has this impacted Oregon, and what can the Oregon legislature do about it? What kinds of environmental legislation is being proposed in this upcoming session, and what are your thoughts about its importance?
Yeah, as someone who's been a climate champion really since 1983, but I didn't do volunteer work until the last 6 or 7 years. This is near and dear to my heart. Representative Gamba did a wonderful bill, I think in the last session, that models what happened in Texas. And basically the concept is you build transmission first, and then you create there's an authority that then you pay for that, the construction of that transition through the development of the energy resource. And you build the transmission along areas where we know there's an excellent resource like wind, solar, and I really would love to see more geothermal. The beauty of geothermal is, one, we're on an incredible geothermal capacity here in Oregon, given the volcanic chain, and two, it could serve like where a natural gas plant currently exists. And the beauty of that is that you don't have to do transmission. If you have a natural gas plant and you replace it with a geothermal, you've already got your transmission in place that's pushing out to customers. So, and you should know, the Trump administration did a lot of bad things in their HR 1, but they didn't eliminate the tax credits for geothermal. So there's a lot of potential there to innovate and then make Oregon a leader in that industry. What Gamba has done, again, has been proven out by what they did in Texas. So I'm really hoping that gets a second look. It doesn't cost the government more. This is completely funded by the producers of the energy. And if they can do it in Texas, by God, we should be able to do it here in Oregon. So I hope that will come through.
Last question for Mr. Osborne. Several wildfire prevention and mitigation bills were introduced in the 2025 session last year and were hotly debated for 5 months, but none ended up passing. Our community experienced a devastating wildfire in Rowena shortly after that session ended. What kinds of wildfire legislation is being considered for the 2026 session? Which ideas do you think should be prioritized, and why?
So this is a critical issue. I know you've experienced it here in the Dalles and Corbett during the Eagle Creek fire. My family was on level 2 evacuation. Most of Corbett did have to evacuate, and so I've really experienced this firsthand. I never thought that I would be walking out of my house while ash was falling, carrying boxes out to my car and getting ready to evacuate. And so this is a really serious issue that we need to be engaging in. It's also one that I've been engaged in for about 15 years. Like I said, I've worked with nonprofits around forestry, the Mountain National Forest in particular, and so I've been looking at and thinking about wildfire, forests, and how it impacts urban communities. And I think that the critical thing in the short session and going forward is making sure that we are doing the kind of home hardening that prevents homes from burning in wildfires. Because the vast majority of homes that burn in wildfires are burned in high wind, ember-driven fire events, like what happened in Eagle Creek, like what happened in Los Angeles, like what happened in Paradise. You can't fight those kind of fires. It's just not possible. With that level of wind speed and the embers, you just can't fight them. But you can protect against homes and structures being burned when they happen by some pretty simple things. By putting a certain level of mesh into the kind of intakes into your attic, by making sure you have this kind of zone 0 defensible space around your house so that there's no combustible material, and by doing a couple other things that we can support homeowners to do at scale so that our homes are hardened from those kind of catastrophic events that will happen at some point in the future. And so that particular piece, I believe, is the most effective way to prevent the kind of damage to human structures that wildfires cause. And then, of course, we need to be thinking about how do we steward our forests in a way in which they can have a healthy relationship to fire, which they've had for the thousands of years that there's been forests on this landscape. And I think that kind of minimization of the threat to human communities will allow us to do that. And I would certainly support that. And I would certainly utilize the plan I shared before about resources to allow us to have the resources to do that.
So now we'll have our closing statements. Each candidate may have up to 2 minutes for your closing statement, and we're going to just start with Mr. Seeger and work our way down.
Well, thanks again to the Wasco County Democrats for putting this together. This has been wonderful. I appreciate all the great conversation with the fellow candidates, and thanks for coming out, everybody. Look, I'm running for basically 4 reasons. One, I've been on council, and I just love this work. I have so much fun doing the analysis, talking to folks, and finding common ground. Cascade Locks is a very diverse, politically diverse council, and we seem to be able to get things done, and I take some credit for that. And if you ask them, I think they would agree with that comment. The next thing is that I really feel like I have a skill for finding undiscovered solutions. I'm good at asking probing questions. My curiosity leads us down paths that a lot of folks wouldn't otherwise go. And you find new solutions when you do that. I got a skill there. I've been doing it at Cascade Locks, and I'd like to apply that at a higher level. And next thing, I come to this job with a lot of grit. One of the things I'm very proud of is that I wrestled in Texas for 11 and a half years. I started in kindergarten. I went all the way to junior year. And I would argue that was formative for me. It created grit, it created resiliency, and it created a fighting spirit. And I feel like that's what got me into West Point, that's what got me through the Army, and that's what gets me through all the challenges I face as I take on this world. And then lastly, I came to the greatest playground on earth because I love Oregon. I love the gorge, and I promise you, when I'm out in those mountains, when I'm out in the river, my spirit is soaring. And because I live here, I feel very good that I'm going to have an incredible propellant to make me a good legislator. I go out and spend a day on the mountain. I'm on my mountain bike. I'm fired up to take on the next day's challenge. And I'd like to think that will continue as long as I'm represented here. And I would love your support. Thank you.
Well, I'd just like to offer my thanks as well. I look forward to continuing to have these conversations with the candidates here. I think this kind of level of discussion and sharing of different ideas is going to generate the best possible candidate and will help us guarantee to win this seat for the Democrats in the fall. My flyers are back there. My website's there. I'm happy to meet with folks one-on-one or invite me out, and I'm happy to meet with people. I'm very available, so please do. You can find a way to schedule with me or find contact information on my website, which is on that flyer back there. And what I would close with is saying that, I'm in this race because I feel like I'm bringing something that's important in this moment. I have the experience of doing as an educator, as a parent, as a community organizer, somebody that's serving in government on the school board, but also as somebody that has done work to build coalitions and to push at the edges of what's possible. Right now, Oregon needs to step up. We are in a serious situation here with the federal government, both withdrawing from and attacking our communities, and we have to look directly at this $5.7 billion deficit. I've said it over and over and over and over again, because whichever one of us wins this race has to be the one that has an answer to that question. Because otherwise, it's cuts. It's just gonna be cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts. We do not have to choose cuts. I'm in this race because I want to invite all of you to envision a way in which we can live and govern in our state that provides housing for people so they can stay in the communities that they love, so we can increase funding to education, so that we can have fully funded preschools, so that we can have health care for everyone, so that we can be doing the wildfire mitigation and climate adaptation work I talked about before. We can do those things. I am in this race to do those things, and we need resources to do those things. Sure, we can find some efficiencies, but we have to close those budget gaps. And I have a clear plan to undo the worst parts of Trump tax policy, to be able to backfill those big cuts, which are not just paperwork, it's a lack of funding to Medicaid and other critical programs. We have billions of dollars that we need to generate. And I have a vision for doing that. I have a vision for supporting people in the fundamentals that they need to make our lives livable here. And I think that's what we should be striving for in government, and I will do that.
I'm running for state representative because the Oregon that I love is slipping away. How much longer will I be able to start my morning off with a run at Indian Creek Trail until a fire burns that forest down? How much longer will we be all able to enjoy the fresh fish and produce that we harvest here in the gorge until the waters are too warm, our farm workers are all deported, and our farm owners are priced out of the already small margins they had to begin with? And when, if ever, will my friends who I grew up with here in Oregon be able to come back home, or suddenly have Seattle and San Francisco and Chicago and New York become more affordable than our cities and towns here in Oregon because the rent prices are similar and their salaries are much higher? Behind each of these problems that we face is a policy decision made in Salem by well-meaning politicians who made the best decision for that day without enough consideration for the impact on the future because they honestly were not going to be that affected by it. Well, the check has come due. I'm the only candidate here that is a member of a generation that is not supposed to do better than my parents. I'm the only renter, I'm the only candidate who does not have a 401k, and I'm also the only candidate with a succinct plan on how to lower costs, the Salem experience to get the job done, and also somebody who has been standing up to President Trump's BS for years as a reporter for the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. A vote for me is a vote for lower costs now, a brighter future ahead, and also waking up every single day to stand up against the Trump administration. You know me, you've seen me at pop events and protests and at coffees and on your doorstep, knocking your door, talking politics. This has been amazing, and it would be an honor to earn your vote on May 19th. Thank you very much.
I am running because I had a conversation with someone in 2024 when I ran for state representative and nearly won. And that person said to me, look, what we are tired of is people showing up for one election, for 1 month, for several months, and then disappearing again. I haven't disappeared on you. In the last 2.5 years as I've been running for this office, I have continually shown up to make sure that someone is listening to what your concerns are. So I've come to your events, I've had conversations with you, I've had coffee with you. I never stopped running after we lost by 1,300 votes because I didn't look you in the eye and tell you that I heard you and then turn around after such a close loss. I've proven that I can build coalitions. Look, I know I'm not supposed to say this, and maybe this will get me in trouble, but nobody worked harder for me than the Dows did in this last election. You all put up billboards, you knocked on doors, you went out there and worked until some of you cried, and I appreciated every single thing that you did, and that is why I am back. That's why I am running again, because we ran against the minority leader last time, guys, and we nearly won. We can do it this time. We can build the coalitions that are necessary. We're going to start knocking on doors out in Mosier pretty soon. We're going to move around to Hood River and into the Dalles. We're going to work on East Clackamas County, which is where I lost in the last election. East Clackamas, East Multnomah. We need to be real. This is an area where Republicans have beat us in the last couple of elections, and so this is my home turf, and I don't intend to let that happen again. I intend to fight hard in all 4 counties. I've been endorsed by the Working Families Party. They believe in me and my ability to win this race. And I meet with them weekly to strategize and make sure that we're paying attention to every corner of this district. Look, I'm here because I believe. I'm here because I see that we can flip this seat, that we have a chance to give the Dows some blue representation so that you aren't known for Cliff Bentz and Cliff Bentz alone, okay? And we're almost done. I'm almost done. My literature is at the back of the desk. Please look up my website, contact me, have a conversation with me, and then I think you get to have cookies now. So, thanks.
And on behalf of the Wasco County Democrats, thank you to our candidates. Thank you for all of you for being here. Please stay for questions and answers, just individual meet and greet with the candidates. We ask you to enjoy the rest of the time here and take your time. Let's talk.